Well, first of all, welcome. Glad you guys could make it. When it stands between you and happy hour, so we'll try and keep things on target here. So we're covering today's creating compelling messages and value for the C-suite. And with that, we're going to talk about creating a compelling business plan, how to go about doing that, how to deliver more than the standard PM break fix function. That's the price of admission, right? That's the expectation for everybody. If you can't do that, you wouldn't be where you are. But our organizations need a lot more than that today. We're also going to talk about how to help executives solve their cost challenges, and obviously right now that's of utmost importance to them. And then how to become recognized as someone your executive leadership team can count on for innovative solutions. And it's a small group. Let's make it interactive. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to jump in and ask questions, okay? So Jeff Bajorek, who wrote a book on sales strategy, said if you can't demonstrate that the time spent with you will be well spent, then you'll have a hard time spending time with the right people, okay? Think about how busy you are in any given day, multiply that by 4, and that's how your executive team is and what they're facing, right? So in order for them to dedicate time for you to pitch stuff to them, they need to feel that that's time well spent, right? So back in March of 2009, I published in BINT an article called The Importance of Good Salesmanship. And these were the key points that I wanted to pull from that. It's, you know, if you guys have AME membership and access to BINT, you can go read the whole article. But the first thing is to have a product worth selling, okay? And so if you want to get some time with your executive leadership and you want to pitch something, you better make sure that whatever it is that you're selling to them is good, right? And it's worth selling. Be committed. I can tell you that when I go to talk to my executive leadership about something that I want to do, what they can see in me is the passion that I bring in presenting that. And if they can't see that, you're not going to be able to convince them, right? So you have to show that level of commitment and passion when you're presenting to them, and demonstrate that you believe that this is the right thing to do and it'll bring value to the organization. Be polished. I talked about this extensively, and I've talked about it with my team. You need to look the part, right? Typically, people in our industry, no offense, but you know, if you walk into your executive's office wearing polo shirt and Dockers, that doesn't present the kind of image of professionalism that you want them to see, right? If any of you attended Dave Francoeur's session before lunch, he talked a little bit about that, and he looked at the disparity between, you know, the people that were presenting to these different government organizations. There were us in the Dockers and polo shirts. There were the suits with the fancy briefcases on the other side, right? And that's not saying that they know more than you, but I often told my leadership group, you have an opportunity to walk into a meeting with the presentation that you are a knowledgeable professional, just by the way that you look. And then you have to work your way down from there. Or you can go the other way and have to work your way up. Why would you choose the latter, right? You may not even get that opportunity. So you know, if you don't think that's important, it is important. Do your homework. And with that, it's, you always play to your audience. You have to understand what's important to them, right? And speak on the terms that will resonate with them. I think back when I was pitching an idea, and I would change the presentation depending on who I was presenting it to. And it was the exact same information, it was the exact same pitch, but if I was pitching it to finance, I would talk about, here's all the money that you can save, and oh, by the way, it'll have an impact on patient care as well. If I was speaking to nursing leadership, again, the exact same presentation, I would talk about it's going to have a huge impact on patient care, and by the way, you're going to save money on top of it, right? So, know what's important to them and play to that audience. That goes right into know your audience and what's important to them. Tap into available sales training resources. I'm going to share with you some of the stuff that I've used over the years. There's a ton of stuff out there. Chuck Bajorek is one sales author that I reference often. And then familiarize yourself with presentation tools. So things like PowerPoint. And I thought I was pretty good at PowerPoint, but I have marketing people that I lean on that are really, really good at it. And I look at the difference between what I get back from them and what I put together, which is usually just a white page with lettering on it. But you'll see that if you have images on there, and the way that it's presented, it can make a big difference in what kind of impact it has. And I will say this: do not get hung up on things like different sounds that you can bring in, or stuff flying in from all over the place, because that's just a distraction, right? It's cool, but don't waste your time with that when you're presenting to executives. Okay. Be persistent, and often I talk about when you present something and it doesn't go anywhere. Think about why it didn't go anywhere, and sometimes it's a matter of timing. Sometimes it's simply the wrong set of ears, right? And so, again, if you do your homework, you have a much better opportunity for success. But if you don't have that success first time around, don't give up. Figure out why it didn't go forward. Figure out what's missing, and even ask the person, right? If they turn down your proposal, say, okay, what's missing here? What am I not hitting that you would need to see in order for this to go through? And then make that happen. Do whatever additional research you need to do to make that, to get that additional background or detail that they're looking for. Deliver what you sell. I can't emphasize enough how important this is, because, and Rob, you know this, you go ahead and you make this presentation to your executive leadership, and they'll give you the green light to move forward with it. By God, do not let anything stand in the way of making that thing happen. If you fulfill your commitments, now you gain a level of credibility, right? And every time you do that, you build a little bit more credibility and a little bit more credibility, to the point where every time you bring something to them, the lens that they're looking through is, I know that whatever this guy committed to, he's going to deliver, right? So that's really important, and that's going to help you with your future success. And then the last thing, follow up. I'm sure you've all worked with good salespeople over the years, and I think that's the one consistent thing that I found with all of them, is that they do really good follow-up. And I think about one instance where we had GE come in and assess our program. And my leadership was worried about that initially, because they weren't sure how I would take that. And I said, look, I'm all about making things better. If they find something that we can do better, I'm all over it, right? So yeah, bring them in. And so they brought them in and they put together this report, and it was very interesting, the results of that, because they carved out a big part of my business entirely, which was my clinic business. And that's where probably the biggest impact of cost and productivity, because people have to travel to get there, right? The other thing that they did, which I leveraged, was they said your cost per bed is higher than the national average. And so I looked at that and I said, well, okay, I will agree with that, but I also know why. Because my costs are entirely dependent on our inventory, right? And so if you look at, and a couple pages further into the report, it showed that our number of devices per bed was higher than the national. Well, again, they tie together, right? And so I agree with that. And so where we can work together, and you can help me with that, is I propose that we implement an RTLS system to be able to track where things are, so we get higher level of utilization out of what we do have. We'll have fewer devices per bed. Subsequently, our cost per bed will be lower. Well, that makes sense. So I took that thing and used it as leverage to get support for doing this RTLS project. So we implemented that, and I made certain commitments. We were targeting at the time, our pump utilization was 42%, which, if you don't know, that's pretty average for the industry, which is terrible, by the way. And so what I committed to was that we were going to raise our pump utilization to 62%. We were going to do that in 3 months. Okay, well, we did it. It wasn't that hard. But I followed up. I brought together the CFO, the CNO, and the CEO, and reported back out to them. All right, here's what I committed to you. Here's what we delivered. And the question back to me was, oh, great, what's next? Right? We started the pumps. What next? What are some other things? And oh, by the way, are there some other? We did a pilot at one facility. Can we now start moving this out to other facilities to do more of that? Like, hell yeah. So that's why that follow-up is critically important. I talked about this in the presentation I did this morning a couple of times. If you read other books on leadership and management, read this one, because there's so much in there about better ways to manage. And this one talks about leadership, about management, process development, and improvement. But the one thing that he talked about in this that it really resonated with me, and it stuck with me over the years, is you first have to believe that it's possible. And remember, I talked about having that passion when you're presenting something. You have to have that belief. And he said in the book that effective people realize that things are created mentally before they're created physically. They write mission and purpose statements and use them as a frame of reference for making future decisions. They clarify values and set priorities before selecting goals and going about their work. Okay? So again, you create it here first, and then it's something that can manifest itself in the physical. You guys familiar with this? The levels guide that Amy put out? We're on the second or third. I think it just released the third version of it. This is from the second version. So Matt Baratich, Frank Painter, and Ted Cohen did this HTM levels guide, and they broke out HTM departments into these 3 categories: fundamental, which provides basic level of technology services and compliance with applicable standards and regulations. And so usually this is something that it's a very small department, okay, that they don't have the size or the capacity to take on a lot of higher end stuff, right? But they provide regulatory compliance, and that's what's expected, right? An established program moves beyond the basics and provides additional services with a focus on cost effectiveness. And this is where your executive leadership is really looking for you to step up, is to find those ways to bring additional cost effectiveness and efficiency, right? And then the advanced, it means you're on the leading edge, demonstrate full range of potential for HDM contributions to patient care. Very few programs achieve this level of performance across the board, but everybody can find opportunities for improvement at this level. So I thought it was a great book. It had, for each of the different levels, had tools to assess where you are, right? So you kind of fill out this form and check boxes in, and it'll tell you where you fall, but also gives you gives you a look at what higher level departments are doing. What it doesn't do is tell you how to get there. Anybody familiar with Good to Great, Jim Collins' book, Good to Great? Yeah. Okay. So Jim Collins wrote another book first called Built to Last. Okay, and he sent it out to some colleagues to review the book, and essentially the premise of it was he did a study of the attributes of high performing companies and the things that were common among all of them. Right? And so the folks that reviewed the book said, well, Jim, this is great, but we're not there, right? And so we're here, and we don't know how to get from here to there. And that's what prompted him to write the book, Good to Great, right? And so with that, he did a little bit different look at things to, again, look at companies that had made that journey from the lower level to the higher level and maintain that, right? So they weren't just like a fart in the wind. They made that leap and maintained it over a long period of time. And then looked at what were the things that they did, and what were the attributes that were common among all of them. That's what went into the book, Good to Great. Another great book, by the way, that I would recommend. But kind of using that, I used the same premise to come up with this maturity curve for HTM. And most departments are in this current state of being viewed as a cost center, necessary evil, maintenance and repair focus, being reactive in firefighting, and just point solutions. And when I talk about just being a PM break fix, you're down in this lower part of the curve, right? How do you get up to that higher part of the curve? Well, it starts with data structure and data integrity, right? Because if you don't have a mechanism to measure how you're doing, how can you improve? The old adage, you can't improve what you can't measure, right? So it starts off by having good data integrity, okay? When I talk about data integrity, most people go in their mind to standardized manufacturing model device category. But that's only part of it, right? You also have to make sure that your people are documenting everything that they do, and they're doing so in a consistent manner, right? So you've got standardized codes. Right now, when I first started this, we had over 150 codes in our CMMS. And so what it created was the high likelihood that I could have 20 different technicians doing the exact same work and coding it 20 different ways. Well, how can I possibly measure and benchmark anything? So that's where we started. We cleaned up all of our codes. We narrowed it down to as small a number as we could and still be able to effectively capture and measure what we were doing, right? And then trained all the technicians on what those codes were, the definitions, and how they used them, right? And then followed up and audited things to make sure that things were being documented in the manner that they needed to be, okay? And once you get that, you get things to the point where everything means the same thing everywhere, then you can centralize and standardize your process system. So not only does everything mean the same thing everywhere, but everybody's doing the same thing everywhere. So now you can start benchmarking. So if you see differences, you can understand why. And that's not all bad, by the way. For instance, if you find that there's one guy that is completing his PMs 30% less time than everybody else, could be because he's skipping steps that he's not supposed to, but it also could be that over his time in the industry, he's learned some tricks that help him do things more efficiently. And if that's true, wouldn't you want everybody to do that, right? Similarly, if somebody's spending more time than they should, okay, maybe it's because the guy's doing stuff that he doesn't need to be doing, or it could be that, once again, he learned over time that if I do these additional steps, I'll prevent failure down the road. And if that's true, don't you want everybody to be doing that, right? So again, it's important, that next step, to centralize and standardize your processes. And once you have that, now you can start developing key performance indicators, and you can start publishing those KPIs to your customers. And then from that, you're increasing your accountability and visibility within the organization, and increasing your customer satisfaction, because guess what? You're measuring that also, right? Did a whole nother presentation on that. I think Ron helped me out with that, but you know, we did annual customer satisfaction surveys, but most modern CMMSs now, you can do real-time surveys as well, so that you can measure how you're doing and get feedback on that to help you continually get better. Okay? And then that takes you from that current state to a preferable future state of being looked at as a customer-focused service business, recognized as a valuable part of the organization, being predictive and proactive instead of reactive, and being involved in total life cycle management, integrating engineering, finance, safety, IT, logistics. Who doesn't want to be over there? Okay. These are the kind of things that will matter to your C-suite, right? If you're on that path, and I'm going to cover how to get on that path, okay? So let's talk about creating a compelling business plan. Who's done SWOT analysis? Some of you, okay, all right. So SWOT analysis is looking at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths, typically physical assets, human assets, structure, process discipline, and leadership. Weaknesses are negative perceptions, things like negative perceptions, a lack of physical assets. So essentially a lack of anything that you find in the strength, right? Opportunities, change in demographics, changes in organizational culture, changes in organizational needs, changes in staffing. One thing I want to call out here is, what's the first word on every one of those bullets? Change, right? And then threats, change in customer base, closing of geographic markets, technological advances, changes in regulations, a new business, and broadened customer base. So I'll share with you a SWOT analysis that we completed. So this is what we determined our strengths were. Our technical staff and expertise. We had, especially in some regions, we had technical expertise. We had people that were trained on CT. We had people that were trained on LinkMed cameras. We had people that were trained on doing LEDAX. Okay, and so we were doing literally all of our ultrasound service in-house. So we had a high level of expertise there. We had really good site and regional leadership. Okay, so we had the people in place that could help us elevate across the board the way we needed to. We had very strong customer relationships. You know, we had great relationships with our clinical leaders, and so that was something that we could build on. We had a strong reputation for skills and customer service in most regions. I say most regions because this was relatively early on in our development, and we had taken on some additional hospitals and expanded our footprint. And in those areas, some of them historically had reported up through facilities management or somebody else within the organization, and they were just, again, they were at the lower end of that maturity curve, and so we weren't doing those high-end things, and so that was a weakness for us in those other regions that we needed to try and build out. And then we had centralized structure and support. So going back to that curve, having the ability to centralize our processes and our systems was a strength. And we looked at our weaknesses, and one is the reliance on selling ideas and strategies to finance before moving forward. And I think that's probably true with any organization, right? That you can't just plow forward with this. You have to get buy-in and support. And that was something that, again, in those areas where we didn't have the reputation that we did, it was a little bit harder hill to climb than it was in areas where we were more established. And so again, less established reputation in some regions, having to overcome skepticism of in-house abilities in less established regions or areas of new services, and then a lack of standardized system policies and procedures. So again, we hadn't reached a point yet where we had those standardized policies and procedures across the entire enterprise. So looked at what our opportunities were, and we had the ability to expand into new service areas, things that we hadn't done before, where there was a tremendous opportunity for cost savings. So we looked at ticket on plan, sterilizers, endoscope repair, and BNA was the Visiting Nurse Association. And so if you're unfamiliar with that, I mean, they've got devices like Pappers that go out to patients, and they come back and they were paying an outsourced company to do that service, and it was costly. Quite frankly, they weren't doing a real good job. So we had an opportunity there to bring that in-house, to serve one of our own entities better than they were being served. And then there were revenue generating opportunities. Baycare was a physician group that had part ownership in one of our hospitals, and I'll tell you, that was a freaking nightmare. It probably still is, but there was an opportunity there to eliminate some high costs and provide better service. And then home health vendors. Again, we had a group that provided cardiac ultrasound services that traveled around. We also had a mobile MRI group. We had MRI engineers, and rather than have them pay a ton of money to have GB service them, the guts of the machine are exactly the same, whether they're mobile or stationary, right? So there was no reason why we couldn't take that on. So that was an opportunity. And then looking at other healthcare organizations where they had a weak or no in-house program, right? So if you think about how Trinity started, right? There were an in-house program out of St. Vincent's that started doing this exact thing, and look where they're at now, right? Threats, always the threat is outsourcing, right? You know, that magic 10% number, right? They'll come in and they'll tell your executive leadership, and by the way, if you don't think they're there, it's just because you don't know it. They're there, right? And they're always there. They're always at the dogs are always at the door. So it's important to get out in front of that and advertise what you do. But again, that's always a threat. Loss of in-house talent to vendors and outside organizations. There was a fear among our finance folk that as we were going down this path of insourcing these contracts, okay, so what if we invest all this money in these people and they decide to go to an OEM or go to somebody else for more money? And so I had a discussion with HR about developing these contracts that if we train somebody and then they left within a certain period of time, they would have to pay back whatever we invested. They weren't buying it. HR said, nope, you need to just do what you have to do to keep them happy here. And they were right. You'd be surprised if you do the right things and you make people feel valued, how much less the money has an impact on their decisions, right? And then at the time we had relatively low staff morale in some of the areas, so we needed to work on that. So this was the strategic plan that we developed, and this is what I presented to my executive leadership. So this document sets out a strategic plan for HTM, reviews strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, presents a series of statements relating to HTM's mission, vision, values, and objectives, sets out its proposed strategies and goals. I went through the SWOT that we had done and presented that. So this is our mission statement. HTM provides engineering, regulatory compliance, safety, technical, and clinical consulting, asset management, and maintenance management services. We serve those who provide care to health systems patients by supplying them with expertise to manage their technology safely, affordably, and effectively. We create and implement innovative, customer-focused, high-quality solutions to ensure the accuracy, reliability, and safety of all patient care technology in a timely and cost-effective manner. And this is what we all do? Should be, right? So this is our vision statement, and I always equate this to if you're building a house, okay? Has anybody here built a house or had a house built? Anybody? No? Okay, so then you know, I mean, this is a time where you decide how big you want it. You decide what kind of flooring you want. You decide what kind of fixtures you want. You decide what kind of finishings, window finishings you want, roof, and all of that. Okay, if you've got a vision in your mind already about what that would look like, right? And if you don't have that, you kind of get what you get, right? So you need to have that vision, and I'm suggesting that you create a vision for where you will be 3, 4, 5 years down the road, right? And so this was our vision. I said HTM will have expanded its staffing and expertise to provide 90 to 95% of support for all clinical applications and systems. Think about that, 90 to 95%. And I'm not talking about managing contracts. I'm talking about doing that ourselves, right? It will have demo services for those specialized or low-end modalities that have been identified to be best serviced in that manner. So I want to go back to who was in Dave Francoeur's session right before lunch. Okay, remember one of the last statements that Dave made, that if you think you're going to continue to do 5 years from now what you're doing today, think again, right? And this is the kind of thing that I think he's talking about, right? Where if you've got higher level of technicians doing low-end service, that's not a good use of your resources, right? And the harder and the further we go down the path here, the harder it's going to be to find highly trained technicians. So you got to think about how to do things differently going forward, right? And this is one of the ways that we did that. So HTM will have developed non-degree clinical engineering aid or assistant positions to cost effectively handle servicing the less technical low-end devices. HTM will be able to easily benchmark, monitor, and report its cost effectiveness to senior administration. HTM will have developed an asset management system to the point where clinical management, site administration, accounting, and finance will have the cost of ownership, depreciation, and service history data readily available to assist in budgeting and equipment replacement decisions. HTM will have established the legal, financial, and organizational infrastructure to be able to market its services outside of the health system. These efforts will translate into an annual net savings revenue generated in excess of $2 million to the health system's bottom line. $2 million annually. Right? You think that got somebody's attention? By the way, I'll tell you that for whatever reason, $1 million is the magic number. So when you're trying to push something, if you can say, don't say, $900,000, $800,000. If you can get to $1 million, that's magic. Okay, and this is key too. We'll provide an annual net savings in excess of $2 million to the bottom line while providing a higher level of service. Who wouldn't want this? If you're an executive leader, would you not want this? Guess what? They want it. So then the last part of this was our values. And by the way, I didn't make these up. These were in direct alignment with what the organization's values were, right? And that's how it should be, right?
So then close that out with what our business objectives were, which is to expand service and expertise to the point of virtual self-reliance and become a highly visible, marketable entity of the health system. And then from that, you think about it. Now, once you have this vision and you understand where you want to go, now you can start using that to develop your goals from year to year. And so where we started with this was, what are the things that are foundational, okay, that we have to have in place before we can get to where we ultimately need to be. So those are the things that went into our year one strategy. And then from there, we built on that year over year. And so these are some of the key strategies. Develop in-house support for high-end modalities, CT, MR, nuke med, to eliminate costly outside services. And like I said, we had some of this in some regions, we just needed to expand it. Complete development of in-house support for anesthesia, laser, sterilizer, imaging, and diagnostic ultrasound equipment in all regions. So again, not just some of the regions, but all the regions. Develop aid or assistant positions to work to push high-end services to more experienced tech while migrating low-end, low-tech services to non-degree positions. Okay, we talked about that in the vision. Right? Complete standardization of services, methods, policies, and procedures while maintaining flexibility to meet the needs of all customers. Complete development and implementation of asset management system, work with corporate IS and CMMS vendor to interface front-end CMMS to capital acquisition, accounting, accounts payable, finance, and purchasing systems. Now, at the time we were doing this, we had, it was a decent CMMS, but it was only a legacy system. And fortunately for us, we had within IT a pretty strong web development team that had the ability to build out a lot of these things. You really won't have those challenges today. If you have a modern CMMS, there's the ability to integrate to a lot of systems that will make this a much shorter step than it was for us. Okay, like if you had to connect. That's right. Develop IS applications expertise to provide support to any device or application that interfaces with clinical equipment. Expand, and on that, think about cybersecurity. Okay, you're seeing a lot more departments now develop that type of position, right? to help with that equipment security, right? Medical equipment security. And it's so funny, I'll go to organizations and I'll ask IT what you're doing about that, and they'll say, well, that's Biomed's problem. You talk to Biomed and they'll say that's IT's problem. So there's this going on and nobody's handling the problem. Right? Expand healthcare technology management website features to provide greater value to customers and staff. So we have our own internal website. And so some of the things that we did there was we had resources where people would go to like CS for things like probes or lead wires and cables and that kind of thing. And so we had pictures of everything with the correct part numbers that were associated with certain models of monitors. And so it provided a good resource for them to go to if they weren't sure on what to order, right? And it eliminated our guys getting called in the middle of the night to provide a set of lead wires. I mean, that's ridiculous. So that was very beneficial to our end users, and we just did a lot of things like that to provide value to them, a lot of resources on the website. And then complete development of lab services, complete development of depot services, develop parts procurement specialist positions. I can't tell you how important that is. Again, going back to doing things differently. I did a survey of my engineers at the time, and I found that on average, we're spending an hour per technician per day on the parts process. So sourcing parts, ordering parts, following up on part orders, doing repair exchanges, everything associated with that. An hour per technician per day. I have 80 technicians with it. Okay, 80 hours a day. Are you freaking kidding me? There's got to be a better way to do this. So I had an open tech position. Instead of hiring a tech, hired a parts procurement specialist. That went over with my technicians like a fart church, but a year later, when they saw the value that brought and how it made each and every one of them more efficient, and gave them more time to do the stuff that they really like to do, which is to fix equipment, nobody was arguing that that was a bad decision, right? And then I wasn't too long after that, I hired a second guy, right? So I had a guy doing all of my parts and a guy doing all the imaging parts. And, they did a fantastic job. Complete development and staffing for support of the DNA, we talked about that. Complete pilot program for in-house endoscopy service, and then complete development of infrastructure for marketing services outside of the health system. And what I will say is this was a 5-year plan, okay? And I broke this down even further to year 1, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. Year 2, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. We completed everything on here except for those last 2 items in 4 years, okay? And the only reason that we didn't do the last 2 is once we figured out what it would take to create our own in-house endoscopy repair service, it was like, no, this is just dumb. Instead, let's go back and negotiate with, you know, we started out with, I think it was IMS, and we had them doing a bunch of our stuff. But then I used that to leverage against Olympus, and was able to negotiate their cost down. So I was getting service from Olympus for little more than what it was costing us from IMS. So we didn't do that. And then we were all hell bent on moving forward with marketing services outside, but our executive leadership changed over to a guy who essentially was an attorney, and he just didn't want to deal with it from a legal perspective, number one. Number two, because he was the system logistics SVP, he didn't want to deal with how competing against our vendors would impact our negotiations and pricing with them. So we didn't do that. But everything else we did. These are a couple of books that I used in working on this stuff. Successful Business Plan Strategy, Secrets of Strategies from Rhonda Abrams was a good one, and Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In was another one, and helping sell these things and move them forward. So help your executives solve their cost challenges. And I don't have to share with you guys what's going on today, but just here's some real numbers around it. So this came from Healthcare Finance, April 2019, and they did a survey of 1,000 healthcare leaders, and these are the things that they saw as trends. Mergers and acquisitions was 25%. I mean, we're all seeing that right now. You have to do that in order to survive in many cases. Consumerism, where patients have a lot more choice about where they go for healthcare, telehealth, artificial intelligence and machine learning, staffing shortages, cybersecurity, and EHR optimization and ancillary technology. This was a Moody's investor service report. It was cited in Becker's Hospital CFO report in August 2018, reported an all-time low of 1.6% average operating margins. And in April of 2019, there was this huge leap to 1.7% operating margin, and yet 2.5% was considered sustainable. I remember the hospitals I was in, we thought we were doing real good because we're at a 2% operating margin. I always like to call this out. You think about what that means. If you're at a 2% operating margin, if you were able to do something to save your organization $1 million, they would have to generate $50 million in new business to have that same bottom line impact. right? So it gives you some idea of what kind of an impact you can have if you go after some of these things and are able to bring that kind of savings to your organization. So this was recent Kaufman Hall's July 2020 report. Again, due to COVID, we went from that 1.7% to negative 3% operating margin. And without federal assistance, that number would have been much, much worse. And healthcare finance just this past month reported that hospital operating margins are down 96% through July. So think about the opportunities that creates. And I will tell you that in my own leadership tenure, the times of greatest opportunity was when the organization was struggling the most, because it reaches a point where, remember I said $1 million is the magic number? Well, during times that are dire, even $100,000 in saving is a big, big deal, right? So those things that might have fallen on deaf ears previously are now, I'm listening, right? So again, that goes back to what I talked about as far as being persistent, right? Maybe the timing just wasn't right, and there's no greater opportunity than right now. So once again, these challenges are real. Expense rate growth exceeds revenue growth for a second consecutive year, and will be for 3 years running now. So we talked about lack of resources, and this is from the 2019 24/7 salary survey, where they reported what the aging workforce was in our industry, right? So average age of imaging techs went from 50 to 52.4. Average age of Tech 3s, 49 to 52, and overall 49 to 51. So how does that jump multiple years in 1 year, right? And how that happens is that you've got more people retiring, not enough new people coming in to backfill those positions. And so that's how it happens. And again, so we need to really think about doing things differently. And couple that with low unemployment, and it makes it even tougher. And so, I mean, these are the things that they're facing: financial pressure, regulatory compliance, siloed departments, disparate systems and processes. And so I always, when I'm talking about opportunities for HTM, I'm challenging you to look at the complete capital life cycle, right? Here is where we typically are involved: installation and acceptance testing, centralized recall management, device repair and analysis, service contract release centralization, parts procurement, just that, right? And yet there are opportunities on the front end, if you're involved in the capital planning process, to provide your input and doing technology assessment to keep the organization from making bad decisions. I show on here some of the tools that we have in place that can help with that. Atendees is a partner of ours. We've got our data insights, which most of you've seen, and that can provide a lot of value on that front. But there are mechanisms to get you to the table, but you need to have a seat at the table. And I've always encouraged people, don't wait to be asked, right? Be aggressive, show what value you can bring, and then just sit up at the table, okay? And once you start demonstrating the value that you can bring, people are going to start looking to you a lot more for that kind of input. Become recognized as someone your executive leadership team can count on for innovative solutions. And so I'm just going to quickly run through one of the quarterly business reviews that I did with my regional executives. And let me just tell you that they're not the least bit interested in what your PM percentage is. They're not. That's an expectation, right? That's That's the price of admission, right? So they don't want to hear about that. What they want to hear about is what have you done for me to help my business be better. And so this is where I outlined what our promise was with regard to our response time, what our performance was against that committed response time. And why is this important? Because we're getting stuff, we're responding to things quicker. We went from outsourced service to in-house service. And so rather than having to wait hours and have that system be down for several hours, or in some cases several days, we're getting things back up and turned around more quickly. And that helps you generate more revenue. Our productivity is up where it needs to be. Service requests by facility. This is something that they really wanted to see because we were a corporate department and we were part of a corporate allocation that went out to each of the different hospitals. Okay, and so what we did is we took our overall budget and then allocated a percentage of that to each of our hospitals and clinics based on what their inventory was, because that's what our costs were associated with. Okay, and so this is something that they liked seeing was how much their hospitals were using us as compared to some of the others. This is something that they really liked seeing, is what cost savings and cost avoidances we generated for their region in that quarter. And that's not an insignificant amount, right? So because of some of the things that we did, we cut their costs, what would have been their costs by $362,000. And I'll go through these really quickly, but this is a monthly downtime report for each of their hospitals' CTs. And again, this is the stuff that they care about, because this is the equipment that's generating revenue for them. So we did that for each of their CTs. We did it for each of their MRs. And then we provided a summary of the downtime across the region. How many service requests, and of those service requests, how many of them were completed by us versus a vendor? Because again, this was right at the time when we had moved all of that service in-house. Well, they don't want to see that they spent the money to bring all that service in-house and we're still paying the OEM to do that work. And then how much of that came after hours. So we did that for each of these modalities, and then what the potential revenue impact was for the time that equipment was down. And then did a financial report, and this was beneficial to me, right? Because often they were complaining about having their costs go up, but they're continually adding inventory. Well, guess what? You add inventory, your costs are going to go up. And so we're constantly being challenged to keep those costs flat. But here you see that there was that one line where we budgeted $100,000 for a Toshiba tube that we knew was going to fail. They took it out of the budget. Well, guess what? It failed. So now we had a variance in our budget, right? So this helped fight that battle by showing them, look, this is what we told you was going to happen. This is actually what happened, right? And then we covered what our successes were: improved response time, reduced average equipment downtime. We completed 90% of the training that was required to move that stuff in-house and reduce the contract. And then we did increase acceptance of service center. And then this is the part, and you'll find this interesting, is once you start these meetings with these folks, they're going to ask you, how can I help, right? If you're moving the needle and you're demonstrating success, they're going to ask, what do you need from me? Okay, and so these are some of the things I shared with them. We had challenges with reporting of equipment status and maintenance activities, so that prompted some things that we were going to develop going forward. We needed to provide training to customers on methods of requesting service, because we were always getting pushback. Why do I need to call Essential Service Center when I got a guy right up the hall I can just call or ping? Well, because then I can't timestamp when the call came in and track how long it took to respond and turn things around, and I'm losing all those metrics. That's why. And oh, by the way, what if the guy down the hall is on vacation or sick that day? I don't think you should have to wait for service, right? So this provides us the ability to get the right person there in the time that we committed to, okay? So some of the future developments, equipment disposal, talked about parts, and then the status board. And so we created an online status board from our, that took information from our CMMS. And so let's say CT was down or a RAD was down, you had the ability to go in and look at what the status was. I had to have some crucial conversations with my staff, because if you weren't real diligent about doing real-time documentation, you better start doing real-time documentation, or that means nothing, right? So that was a good step forward. Like I talked about, if you have a modern CMMS, you're doing real-time surveys, but they also have the ability to go in and view that status online through your web portal, right? So this is just the last thing I wanted to share is who's seen the SBAR methodology for, okay? And so one of the things I learned, I took a communications class way back when, early in my management tenure. And they said, here's the key when you're communicating to executives. You need to summarize the summary, right? Again, I'm talking about how busy they are and how much stuff they have on their plate. You need to be very clear and concise, and this was a great method to convey information. Here's the situation, just a very concise description of the problem. Here's the background, and the relevant or brief information related to the situation. And again, everything says brief, right, and concise. Your assessment of the situation, analysis and consideration of options, and then a recommendation, okay? Here's the situation, here's the background, here's what I see, here's what I recommend doing, okay? Great way to communicate. That's it. Any questions?
Yeah.
What's that?
You said it's comprehensive, just some good stuff.
Okay. You guys have anything available?
Yeah,
Anybody
we're
else?
working right now. We'll have
If anybody wants to contact me with questions about any of this down the road, this is agresch@accruent.com. agresch@accruent.com. Rob's got me on speed dial, so